What's up everyone, Unit 522 here. Before this video begins, I wanted to give a big thank you to Dr. Horror for teaming up with me on this video. He's one of my all-time favorite horror narrators, and I'm glad that we could work together on this. So if you haven't done so already, please go over to his channel and check it out after the video is done. And without further ado, here is 3 horrifying murder stories. In September of 1998, I knew all 3 victims of a triple homicide. I will preference this story by saying that I come from a pretty dysfunctional family filled with a lot of accidents, violence, and sadly, death. It wasn't a rare year if a few people died of unnatural causes or non-illnesses. But I guess that's what happens when poverty and lack of education collide. It was never that much of a shock when someone died, and after a while, if no one passes, it starts to feel weird, like someone's gotta go soon. In the words of Metallica, it's sad, but true. I was staying at a friend's house on a Friday night. As we were going to bed, I said to her that it had been a long time since anyone had passed, and I felt that something bad was going to happen. The next morning, I get a call at her house at 7 a.m. from my dad. He said that he needed to come get me because something was wrong with my aunt. He picked me up, and you could tell that he had been crying and he hadn't slept all night. He broke down and told me that my aunt, my 10-year-old cousin, and his father had been murdered the night before. My cousin and his father had been shot and stabbed, and my aunt had been shot, stabbed, beaten, and hogtied. Her older son, who was at a dance, was supposed to be picked up. He had someone drive him home. This family loved Halloween and gore and watched horror movies like no one's business. When he walked in the house, he thought they had played an elaborate prank on him. There was blood all over the walls, broken lamps, stab marks in the furniture. From what my mom tells me, when they did a walkthrough after the murders, it really did look like a horror movie. He looked around the house for them and ultimately found his half-brother and former stepdad dead in the basement. For a while, they couldn't find his mom. Another police officer on the scene discovered a fort that the boys had made, and that's where they found her body. Now, my aunt was married to someone else at the time of this murder. They owned this home together, and things were looking good for them. And the man at the house was her ex-husband, and the boy that died was their son together. The dad was bringing him over to spend the weekend with his mom for her birthday. They finally managed to locate the aunt's husband, who was in Michigan picking up his kids from another marriage. Weeks passed before they released the final cause of death. I will not go into detail, but I will say that the kid got it the worst. It was horrific. They were finally able to hold a service for my family, and everyone was a mess. My dad lost his mind after this ordeal. It was all over the papers, on every news station. You couldn't go anywhere without hearing about it. The day of the funeral, we all went back to my grandma's house. The whole family, her husband, her other son, etc. I was sitting on the couch by her husband, and he was crying until the news came on. It was a flash of the house, and an update that the police still had no clue as to who was responsible for the murders. He was stone-faced. I went to one of my grandma's spare rooms to watch a movie while the adults talked and ended up falling asleep. My mom came into my room to find my aunt's husband staring at me, and she asked what he was doing. He replied,
"She just looks so peaceful,"
and he left the room. I always got along really well with him. He was nice and pretty funny, and seemed to treat my aunt very well. The coming weeks proved to be exhausting. No leads, no clues, nothing. Then one day the police got a call from someone saying that they overheard a conversation between 2 people talking about the gun used in the murder. The 2 people were my aunt's husband and his uncle. The police found the gun and were able to piece things together. They found a receipt for the duct tape used to tie my aunt up in her husband's work truck. They also found out that he had taken over a $500,000 insurance policy out on her less than a year before she died. Turns out this guy had a lot of shit going on that nobody knew about. He owned a few houses and was showing up at one of the tenants' windows in the middle of the night, telling her to
"Get out of my dreams."
He was severely in debt, and word on the street is that he had some people after him for cash. He was ultimately tried and convicted for all 3 of the killings, and was the first to get the death penalty in over 15 years in my state.
I lived in Astoria in Ravenswood houses in the 90s. I was friends with the mailman, who was a really cool guy. His name was Rich. What happened after New Year's was crazy, and for months I saw this man deteriorate into a killer. Rich was an all-around cool guy. He was a good-looking, charismatic mailman who delivered mail around our neighborhood. His baby's mom lived in my projects in Ravenswood houses. He would say hi to everyone, and on Christmas, no matter how poor people were, they often left him a tip in cash. Rich had a dark side to him that involved a fight where he beat his baby's mom and got a restraining order. He broke her orbital bone during an argument. During that year, his girlfriend would often walk around with 2 black eyes or a swollen cheek. He was beating her. He did not show up for 2 weeks because of some departmental procedure suspending him till they found out what the case was about. I saw him 2 weeks later and Rich was less cheery. The new year brought him a child support garnishment for his kid and legal problems, not to mention problems regarding custody. A few months passed and I had noticed him staring into the distance of the hot sun. He did not look good. His long stares would be longer and longer, and it would take his name being called 3 times for him to respond. Everyone around the area heard he had broken a court order and beat his girlfriend again. Rich was not the cheery, charismatic man we had once known, but something darker. One day, coming out from work, I see a Telemundo truck with Eyewitness News Channel 7 and a New York 1 news van. Rich killed his wife and 7-year-old and 13-year-old stepson. Both heads were chopped off. The kid's penis was found in their mouths. Both heads were in a closet. They lived 2 buildings down from me, and my friend was their neighbor. Cops sealed off the building. Rich tried to slit his wrist, but failed and was taken by an ambulance. After detectives left the crime scene 2 weeks later and everything was concluded, we snuck through my neighbor's yard, who lived next door to the crime scene. All the action took place in the kitchen. There were trails of blood from the living room leading into the bedroom, like the bodies had been dragged. The bedroom had a broken door, but we didn't go inside. This was before crime scene cleanup came. I had nightmares for weeks. There was a boy who lived in my building who was 7, who was friends with Rich's kid. He became completely traumatized after he heard about his friend's death. His mother encouraged me to talk to him, since he looked up to me as a big brother. I remember he asked me, "Why do people hurt kids?" I could only say, "Because they are sick in their heads." He sobbed in front of me and I, of course, comforted him. From that point on, I had trouble sleeping for a while. Going in the actual murder scene made things much worse. I will always remember a blank stare when I joked around with him. It was like he was staring through me.
This particular occurrence never put me in any jeopardy. It was more my neighbors, but creepy nonetheless. Keep in mind that I am unsure of the exact age I was during this series of events, but this took place over a majority of my life and promptly ended in 2011 when I was 11 years old. I remember most of these things happening, and my mom has filled me in on some of the details. I live in a good neighborhood in a good city. It was being built when we moved there, but I always remember these 2 being my neighbors. Their names were Betty and Jeff. The first interaction I remember having with either of them was when Betty gave my sister and I a whole bunch of McDonald's toys. You know how they display every one of the toys inside? We got one of those displays. I was 5 and my sister was 2, and I remember being ecstatic as any younger child would be. My mom later informed me that Betty would tell her that we were the cutest kids in the world and that she wished that she had children like us. Fast forward a few years later, where I'm guessing I was about 7 or 8, I was hanging out with another girl my age and was also my neighbor down the street. We left my house and we started walking towards hers. When we got outside, we saw Betty throwing a bunch of Jeff's shit out the second-story window. I vividly remember her screaming profanities as she tossed an old TV set out the window and smelling cologne that she must have thrown out the window as well. My friend and I rushed to get inside and just thought she was crazy. Between the age of 8 and 10, Betty and Jeff must have had a few more fights. Nothing I can remember, but I do remember my mom telling me that Betty confronted my dad. My dad had been outside doing yard work at about 8:30 or 9 p.m. It was summertime, so the sun was still out, and the kids were still outside yelling and playing. All of a sudden, Betty marched out of her house and straight to my dad. She yelled at him for keeping everyone awake with the sound of a leaf blower, and probably called him a motherfucker a few times. I would understand her anger more if it was dark out, but it still kind of confuses me. Maybe she had a right to be angry. One day when I was 10, I returned home from school to the sight of police cars and a bunch of yellow caution tape surrounding Betty and Jeff's house. I ran inside and asked my mother what happened, but she had no clue. She later found out from my other neighbor that Betty had died, possibly being thrown down the stairs or something like that. They were trying to figure out if it was self-inflicted or if Jeff had finally lost his shit and killed that crazy bitch. A few days later, I was outside by myself drawing with chalk. As soon as I got outside, I saw Jeff walk over to his glass door. He hadn't been arrested for anything yet and was still presumed innocent. I thought I had nothing to worry about, so I continued and retrieved my chalk from the garage. I began to draw when I noticed that Jeff was staring out his door and staring directly at me. This continued for about 10 minutes. I eventually got creeped the fuck out and went to go tell my dad. By the time he came outside with me, Jeff had left the door. That's when I realized that maybe Jeff was the batshit crazy one. In April of 2011, Jeff was convicted of aggravated murder and sentenced to life in prison with no chance of parole for 30 years. He gave Betty a fatal dose of antifreeze, and I'm unsure if he pushed or dragged her dead body down the stairs for good measure. After reading an article on it, Betty claimed that Jeff was very abusive and would not let her do anything without his permission. That would explain her behavior, but I'm not still completely convinced that she was entirely innocent either. A new couple has since moved into their house. They are completely normal from what I can tell, and we haven't had any murderous events happen on my street since. Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please share, like, and comment, and become part of the Unity by hitting the subscribe button. If you have a scary story that you would like to share, be sure to send it to my email or post it on the free horror stories subreddit. Consider donating to this channel and be sure to follow me on Twitter. And until next time, stay spooky and never forget, there's always a reason to be afraid.